Nancy's getting that the meeting is not a valid message. Can somebody text her the?
Yes, I'll send it to her.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Linda Van Hart. Welcome to the Gallery Talks. I'm the Visual Arts Coordinator for Common Ground on the Hill. And every year it's my pleasure to host these artists who are passionate about their work, bringing the joy of creativity, engaging your hands, your minds, your hearts in what it is they do. And tonight our special feature is fiber and wearables. So we are meeting with Joanne Streel-Bost, we're meeting with Carly Miller, and we're meeting with Nancy Mackenzie. So you will see a wide range of the use of fiber and wearable arts. One of the issues that is going to be embedded in all the talks that we do during these 3 weeks is the difference between sheltering in place, which we've all been doing, and migrating in place, which I firmly believe all the artists who are with us have been doing. I certainly have. And the difference is sheltering in place, it's like a retreat to someplace safe and protected from the outside world. Shelter from the elements is essential to human beings. And recently we've all had to shelter in place because of this virus and other issues in the world. When you shelter in place, once you get there, there's not a lot of movement. Migration, on the other hand, is all about movement, motion, action, decision. So as animals, birds, fish, insects migrate, sometimes it's a seasonal thing. Sometimes, as unfortunate as it was in Australia, it's to flee a huge fire. In the human race, people migrate to find a better job, to create a better situation for their families, to flee political unrest. I think when artists migrate inside, it's to identify their individual voice. And as they migrate, they leave outside what is not essential to their creativity. And I'd like each of our artists tonight to talk a little bit about that, because when you migrate inside and find that area of creativity, that's when the action really begins. Your intuition, your imagination, your spontaneity, the intermix of those qualities with materials of construction creates something new. And often that comes out of a situation of chaos in which we found ourselves recently. And hopefully that's where sheltering in place and migrating to find our own individual space comes together, because there's comfort in that. It's exciting, it's dynamic, but it's comfortable to find your own voice, to identify the characteristics of your individual style. So that's what I would like our artists tonight to talk about as they present a portfolio of their own beautiful work and talk to you a little bit about their classes and what their classes are doing and what they're hoping their students will learn. So tonight we're going to begin with Joanne. She's been teaching with us several years. Joanne and I have known each other for decades. She's an amazing artist. She works in many media, but this year she has brought her beading to us, and she will speak to that now. Thank you, Joanne.
Okay, let's see if I get all the dots in the right place. I'm Joanne Bast, and this week I've been teaching beadwork in a modular manner. So what we're doing is producing small snippets, modules of beadwork of different techniques, all based on the peyote stitch, which is it's a relatively simple stitch in the sense that you pick up a bead, skip a bead, and go through a bead, and repeat this in a variety of manners. So I'm going to put on some slides here so that you can see a little bit about what we've been doing. So first of all, we click share screen, and then we go move that out of the way. Click this. And what was it that I clicked up here?
You want to click play on the left.
I can't, oh, there it is. Okay, we don't need that one. This is a sample of modules of beads that are just worked in a fun and free form way, all based on this basic peyote stitch. So what we're doing in class is working different modules. The one on the far left is one that involves a lot of increasing and sculptural work. As we move over, we're incorporating larger beads and beads that stick out and give you texture. Strips of beads that we're plaiting together. Larger beads incorporated in the stitch itself. Just having fun with ruffling and structurally moving these beads around and stitching them together. I have a policy, I guess. If you're working with a piece of beadwork and you put a new bead on your needle, you stick your needle back into the basic beadwork, you pull your thread tight. If the bead doesn't fall off, it's right. Okay, here's a selection of the modules that you saw in the previous slide, arranged in a manner that in which they could be put together to form a necklace. And they could be put together in many different ways, and you could sit here and play with them until you find the way that you like. So from here, we're going to go on, and I'm going to show you a variety of finished necklaces that I've done, all based on this working in modules and then putting the modules together. So I don't really know what to say other than looking at the variety that you can come up with just playing with pieces. And the nice thing about this is if you don't like a module, it's not connected to your work until you decide to connect it in. I like to use a lot of artist glass. I've done a little bit of the lamp working myself, just enough to appreciate what lamp workers do. But when I put all this labor into the stitching, I'd rather work with a master's lamp worked glass than my amateur work. I often find that looking at a lamp worker's glass gives me all kinds of ideas as to how to work. Okay, incorporated here are not only beads, but little chips of stone, chips of turquoise. Anything with a hole in it can be considered a bead. These are all done with peyote stitch. Okay, here's a larger piece that features a carved tauga nut from Peru. It's a vegetable nut that the Indians carve and paint with various inks, but they're really impressive, the carvings they get. Okay, another one. You can see I like texture, and I know people say less is more, and I appreciate less is more when other people do it. But when I do it, it's more is more. Okay, necklaces aren't the only thing you can make. This is a selection of bracelets that are all done in a modular manner. And a couple pair of earrings where the modules didn't fit into the necklace, so we make earrings. They don't necessarily have to be identical. In fact, it's very difficult to make them identical. If I want to make them identical, I have to actually work on the two pair at exactly the same time, working from one to the other. And I find it much more interesting just to let them form. Okay, this is also peyote stitch. not done in a sculptural manner, but done in a very graphic manner. A peyote stitch lends itself very well to geometric designs. You can get a good vertical and a good diagonal in peyote stitch. In order to get a horizontal, you either get a serrated line that's like a dotted line, or one that has a little zigzag to it. So peyote stitch is great on the verticals and the diagonals, less good on the horizontals. This is actually the same piece, but the fused glass worker, and I'm sorry I no longer have her name, but the piece was reversible. So it's the same piece, the same necklace, but the glass was visible on both sides. So the necklace becomes reversible and visible on both sides, which is kind of a neat thing. And the triangle shape led itself into doing a variety of triangles with the peyote stitch. Okay, these are also peyote stitch. Again, not worked with the sculptural, but worked more with a graphic idea. But changing bead sizes, you know, working them around, and just letting the stitch play with itself. Whoops. We're going to go back on this one. Peyote stitch is great graphically, but if you want to do a picture in peyote stitch, it turns out pixelated, because it's done with the you take a bead, you skip a bead, you go through a bead, you end up with a grid of beads. I have another stitch that I like a whole lot called brick stitch. This particular necklace is not one we're doing in class, but I'm putting it in here as a plug because I'd really like to ask to do a class on brick stitch next year. This area in the bottom, and I don't know how to point it out here, but if you look at the necklace in the center and you see those rows of big round green beads, you see how they curve? That nice smooth curve is brick stitch. It's difficult to get that nice smooth curve with peyote stitch. But if you go over to the edge of the area that has those big green beads, you end up with a jagged area, because brick stitch can give you a good horizontal and a good diagonal, but it doesn't give you a good vertical. It's the reverse of the peyote. So if you turn brick stitch 90 degrees, you've got the basis of the up, down, up, down, up, down that you can work peyote stitch. So from the edges of the green bead, and I'm trying to point at this, and I know you can't see my pointer finger. And from the edge of those green round beads and outward, I pick up peyote stitch from the edge of the brick stitch. So this is a combination of switching back and forth between peyote stitch and brick stitch, using each stitch what that particular stitch is good at. Okay? Now, when I said brick stitch, it can give you a curve. These are figures done in brick stitch. And these are figures that I could not have done in peyote stitch because peyote stitch is pixelated. With brick stitch, you can take your original line of stitches, bend it into any shape you want, and by working increasing on one side and decreasing on the other side, make that basic line curve into any direction you want. You can draw with brick stitch. Okay? This is a large piece. It's 12 by 19 inches. I did it for the Fiber Arts Guild of Pittsburgh benefit project. They did a deck of playing cards where every artist did a different playing card. This is the 6 of clubs. It has 6 nightclub dancers, the Charleston, the swing, and disco. Okay, these figures are brick stitch. And if you look at the enlargement over here, you can see that the lines of stitches are going in different directions. I use larger beads and lighter beads to make a forearm come forward, darker and smaller beads to make a leg recede. It took a lot of thought to do this, but it was fun. It was very addictive. Okay. Now, whoops. This is the class I'm teaching next week, which is covering a rock with beadwork. The stitch that's used here is called right angle weave. Right angle weave has no straight lines. Now look at the background, not at the figures. There's no straight lines in the background. That's because right angle weave is based on a circle of 4 beads. So you've got north, south, east, and west beads, and the structure is circle clockwise, circle counterclockwise, circle clockwise, circle counterclockwise. It gives you a fabric of beads that's almost all bias. It stretches in all directions. That makes it good for covering an irregularly shaped object. Now the figures in here, we probably won't get to figures in class next week unless the students are already pretty advanced in beadwork, but the figures are brick stitch. And that's where you see the lines of beads that are curved in whatever direction I want to use them. And that's drawing with brick stitch. This is kind of fun, little turtles in brick stitch embedded in a right angle weave around little bitty rocks. Okay, and this is the last one, which is a more elaborate rock, right angle weave around the rock, brick stitch for the body of the lizard that is flat on the bead. And then when I get, flat on the rock, when I get to the end of the lizard's body up near his shoulder, switch to peyote stitch, because now I'm working on the side of the brick stitch using peyote to work off 90 degrees off of the way I was working previously, and built the lizard 3-dimensionally crawling out of the rock. So it's a usage of different beadwork stitches to the advantage that each stitch gives me, and switching back and forth from one stitch to another to use those stitches to their best advantage. And I think that is the last slide. Okay, so what do I do? Can't find my cursor. Where is the cursor? Okay, stop. Oh, I see where stop share is, but I can't find the cursor, so I can't get there. This is... Oh,
There you go.
did we do it? Yeah. But now I have to put these things... I'm sorry, I had to take the mouse out in order to plug in the webcams, which I'm using for class. So my finger on this little stupid device. Okay, I need to get...
We can see you just fine, Joanne.
Can you? Because all I see is a white screen, but if you can see me, I'll worry about it later.
Yes, we have you on screen.
Okay. Well, anybody have any questions?
That was wonderful, Joanne. Thank you so much. And I appreciate you advertising what you want to teach next year. I think the brick stitch class would be great. I love the examples that you've shown, and it's nice to advertise your class next week. I just handed out a package for the beaded rock class, and you have 2 kits left, by the way.
Okay, I have 2 or 3 more at home.
If anybody in our audience is interested in that beaded rock class, they can call me or call you and pick up. Thank you so much. It's always an adventure in color and texture to visit with Joanne and her beaded work. It's been years, Carly. You're going to have to tell me how many you've been working with us. And I'm encouraging Carly, she does such beautiful work, to publish a book of her own on braids, because during her time teaching with us very enthusiastically and passionately, she's delved into a lot of the history of braids. It's such an influential technique in so many cultures, and she's going to tell you a little bit about her discoveries investigating all these cultures, and then she's going to show you some techniques. Welcome, Carly Miller.
Thank you, Linda. The first thing, I'm not even sure how long I've been teaching. I want to say maybe 6, 7, 8 years. I'm not sure, but it's all been a blast, including this year. I'm having a really great class, and I'm really excited to talk about braiding. So that's what I'm teaching this week, is the braided course, where we focus primarily on French braids and different kind of styles and movement of braids. And then we also switch to the Dutch braid. I'm going to show you some examples in just a little bit, and I'm actually going to get to do a demo with a mannequin. People typically ask me how I got started. I think that's really important. I learned when I was in 3rd grade. I was just a really young girl, and my babysitter taught me. As I grew older, I played sports, and I was an athlete. So I had the opportunity to braid a lot of the girls' hair before games. I would literally be braiding on the bus on all of our away games. And then as a teacher, a 6th grade teacher, I just started braiding girls' hair, and I got kind of tired of braiding just single braids right down the back of the head. So I started experimenting and having fun with it. And it wasn't until Common Ground that it became a little bit more for me. I'm not a hairstylist, I'm a teacher, but I really enjoy the art of braiding and the movement and the technique and the skill of braiding. But like I said, it wasn't until Common Ground that I realized that braiding is so much more than a hairstyle. Braiding is a cultural tradition, and it transcends time and racial and economic and social boundaries. So it's absolutely perfect for Common Ground. I just didn't realize it until I got here. Also, in current times in our society, it just fits so well, and it's so relevant as an art. As Linda mentioned earlier, I did try to kind of bring a little bit more to my curriculum, and I focus just a little bit every morning on a different culture. After doing my own research, I realized that, like I said, braiding transcends time. It's been around since the beginning of time. It's been on every continent, every culture you can imagine. The ones that I particularly focus on are African tribes. We've also talked about Native Americans, the medieval time and the Renaissance period, also Egypt. And then I end up on Friday and I bring it back to now with pop culture, which braiding is still really, really popular today. So we talk a little bit about what that looks like in the culture and what those braids mean. So it's not just a hairstyle. Braids have really, well, they have a lot of a significance in certain tribes and certain cultures. They have determined status. There are certain places where you could have a braid if you're married or you're unmarried, but you wouldn't be allowed to have the same braid. They've determined also wealth. Other times where the wealthy folks are not able to have the same braid as a peasant, for example, in a society. But I think it can tell you a lot about it. And there's a lot of religious ceremonies that utilize braiding and putting trinkets and jewelry and bones and fur and feathers into their braids to adorn them. So it's just a really beautiful piece. I also want to mention, particularly now in what we would call, as Linda mentioned, the shelter in place or quarantine or social distancing, regardless of what you call it, we've been home. Braiding is such an intimate piece. It's a little bit different. What I love is, like, you can do it to yourself, but you're also giving it to somebody else. You're putting your hands on somebody. So it's super personal. It's really intimate. And in a time when we are not around other humans and we need that, it's a really beautiful thing. I say it every single year that it's a gift. But I think particularly now and what we're dealing with as a society, it's even more of a gift because it's so relevant and so personal. I've noticed in my own time how much braiding can affect self-confidence and self-esteem. It can bring people together. I see that on sports teams, and girls all have the same braid, but it really affects us on the inside. What I'd love to see when I braid my students, maybe someone's having a bad day, maybe they're not, but after they get a braid, they stand up a little bit taller and they prance around and they're just really proud. It's a beautiful thing. So I love to have the opportunity to teach other people this skill because anybody can do it. I tell my students that on day one. I know, well, it follows along with everything at Common Ground. You get in the first day, you're overwhelmed and thinking to yourself, how could I possibly do this? But you just, step by step, you can figure it out. My students braid exactly like I do by Friday. I know that sounds crazy, but it's true. So I would love to see you, whoever's out there in Zoom land right now, in my classes in the next couple of years. With that said, I'm going to go ahead and I do have a book. It's not published. And Linda, I promise I'm going to put something together at some point in time. But I have a book. I'm going to show you some photos of my personal braids. My curriculum actually kind of follows this book. So I do address every single braid in this book. I think there's 20 or 30 braids. And my students would have the opportunity to learn and be able to do these by the end of the week. So I'm just going to show you a couple, and then I'm going to do a demo for you because it's just like a nice little gift that I can do that right in front of you on camera. So if we can head on over to my other camera, that would be great. So here's the book. I'm just going to show you a couple of photos, some things we look at. These are just the single braids. That's kind of our foundation of our step. And we're learning the rhythm. And we're learning the movement and the patterns. I'll show you a couple more here. This is one we learned today. So you're just pulling from one side. It's called the Cascade Braid. Let's see some other ones. We learned this one today. In class, this is the Crisscross Braid. And there's the pigtails. We also learned this in class today, and you should have seen my students. It was amazing. They were nailing this one. There's a spiral braid. Let's see what else I can show you. Here's a fishtail, a very, very popular braid. And then we get into some really fun, like 4-strand braids. This is one that we're going to learn later this week. It's a heart braid. Girls love that one. And there's the last one, the waterfall braid. So we'll learn that as well. So I want to go ahead and take the opportunity to show you. This is my mannequin I bought this week. I wasn't quite sure how this was going to look virtually with braiding because I usually use alive little models so that my Common Ground students have the opportunity to work with different students with different hair texture and style and length. But I bought a model, so that's really helping me out in a lot of ways, and it's a different perspective for sure as far as braiding. This is the Zig Zag Braid. I just braided her hair right before this meeting. I'll just do a little spin so you get to see it. And that's the back of it. Go down. And it's just a beautiful movement and patterns. So that's the one braid I wanted to show you. And then I'm going to actually take this out. And I'm going to do a quick demo for you. Something else I think is really beautiful. It's okay. I'm sure there's people out there right now like, I can't believe she's taking that out, because that's what my students say every single day. But that's how we learn. Practice, practice, practice. So I'm going to do a Dutch braid, which is an inverted French braid. We have not learned that this week, but I'm going to tackle it tomorrow with my students. I have some really awesome students this week that are just killing it. So I know they'll be able to handle this. So this is a Dutch braid, and then I'm going to show you a little flare just to make it extra special when I'm finished. So if you know anything about the French braid, the Dutch braid, like I said, is inverted, and it's just going under. again, this looks pretty intricate, but that's just a pattern. And once you learn the movement of your hands and the rhythm of it, it actually goes pretty quickly. So if any of my students are on, this is what we're going to be doing tomorrow. So you got a little bit of foreshadowing. I will put her head back a little bit so you can see. I'm going to continue this pretty quickly and not give as much instruction. I'm going to push her head down so you guys can see that. It's been really nice this week because all my students have either a daughter or a niece or a family member, or they have a mannequin as well to work on. And there's pros and cons of both. This is the first time I've ever utilized a mannequin, but it's kind of nice. If you do want to get a mannequin, I would suggest human hair. They have two options. Human hair is a little bit more expensive, but it's just really nice working with real human hair and not synthetic. It doesn't, it just feels better. Okay, so I'm going to wrap this up and show you at the bottom what that looks like. And then we're going to do this new little piece that I learned. It's really beautiful. Now you can only do this that I'm aware of with a Dutch braid. That's what I just did. Or a fishtail braid. But you can see what it looks like right now. I'm going to pull it back a little bit. And then what we're going to do is basically flare it out. It's just a different look, and I think it's beautiful. So you're just going to pull the sides. You're going to see it widens up. Just a different look, but it's really, really pretty. And you keep going until it's all uniform. And there you go. I'm going to go ahead and show that to you right now. Just, it almost looks like ribbon. All right. So that is the Dutch braid. Thank you so much for hanging tight with me. That's my demo. I'm going to have on back real quick. Thank you, Carol, for helping me out too and switching this. Okay, so I just want to say thank you so much for everyone that's joining in the Common Ground deal. Even though we're virtual this year, it does not take away from it. You can really get a lot from it and learn a lot of fun skills. And, you know, Linda keeps talking about the whole idea of time. What's so beautiful about art is you can get better with time, and we all have so much time right now. So I definitely encourage you to take my braiding class in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carly. I know that all of you can see some similarities in what Carly was doing and what Joanne was doing, even though they're using very different media. You've got so much rhythm in the braided patterns, and Joanne is so good. Joanne's patterns are syncopated. You know, the rhythm is just exceptional in both of their art forms. I'd like to introduce you to Nancy Mackenzie, one of the bravest women that I've never known yet. But we had a terrible accident with one of our artists, fell and bones protruded. She's had surgery today. I hear she's doing well. And at the final hour, Nancy Mackenzie bravely and with lots of talent and skill came in to take over our knitting class, and we're very grateful to her. So this is a first for her in many ways. She's very familiar with the McDaniel campus, but of course, none of us are there. We graduated from there as Western Maryland College students years ago.
Yes, class ring, class ring.
and her husband actually lived near me when we lived in Betteville for a while. So we've known of each other, but now she's going to get a chance to share her art form with you. She's such a generous soul. It was hard for her to rustle up samples because she gives so much of what she makes away. So Nancy Mackenzie is teaching the knitting class, and it's been so popular, we're obviously going to have it returned. This year, it's a beginning knitting class. And since the students are achieving quite a bit, we're going to have an intermediate knitting class next year.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we'll talk about that. We'll talk
All right.
about that.
Welcome, Nancy.
Thank you, Linda. I'm Nancy Mackenzie, the last minute draftee to teach beginning knitting. And I'm so glad it was beginning knitting because I'm really good with the basic skills. I don't do all the fancy, the really intricate knitting that other people do. I'm a knitting judge for the Maryland Association of Agricultural Fairs and Shows. So I know what it all looks like. I've seen it all. I've judged it all. But in terms of what I do personally, I tend to stick more to a basic level, kind of going my own path as opposed to following patterns. You know, I've been very lucky to have really wonderful students this week. They have had a sense of humor. They've really been working hard at doing what learning the skill. And the thing that I'm most proud of is that they're not afraid to get it this long and say, wait, I don't like what it's looking like. I'm going to rip it all out and start over again, because they're confident enough with their skills of starting a piece and with knitting a piece that they'll sacrifice all that time and go back and start over again to make it what they want. So I'm really proud of that. They're really great women that are in my group, and I'm just thrilled. Like I said, my knitting is not exactly what other people do. I tend to find discarded and used stuff and then turn it into useful stuff. You'll find me in the Goodwill. You'll find me at yard sales, at rummage sales, and bringing back, you know, basically any knitting supply that never found a home or has a home and lost a home is now home with me. So there are just tons of knitting things. And then pretty much I just go from there. I'm going to start my slideshow now. Let me see if I can share my screen and bring up my slide. And wait, come on, slideshow. There you are. There's the slideshow. Come on. Come to mama. All right. What are we seeing right now on the screen? Do we have this on the screen yet?
Yes, yes, it is.
Okay. All right. So basically this is a portion of my knitting junk that I threw on top of the bed when Linda said we need pictures. So I threw it all out there, and it's still stashed in bags. I'll have to resort it again. But I have needles and just parts from all over the place. Places I found, a couple of my knitting bags are up there. A few things that I find important are like having a ruler and having a needle gauge for double pointed needles, but I just collect stuff. It's there, and then I'll find a way to use it. But I tend to come back. When I first started knitting, I was knitting this giant Doctor Who scarf. Thank you, Kelsey Wales, of 16 feet long. That it's somewhere around here. I haven't gotten rid of it, but I'm not sure where it is at this time. And it is 16 feet long, so it's stuck in a basket somewhere. But then I went to the Carroll County Public Library, and they said, oh yeah, we're giving a free class in basic knitting. So they're like, well, why don't I brush up my skills? And they taught me this dishcloth. Well, this dishcloth is called the granny dishcloth on most places. It's a pattern that has been handed down. People have it from ages and ages, and it's been handed from hand to hand. I love this thing. It become innate for me. I can do it with my eyes. Well, yes, sometimes with my eyes closed, and I don't have to think about it. It's just what it is. But then other times I do, like I find homeless yarn and make things out of it. This was a batch of scarves I donated to Shepherd staff probably about 5-6 years ago. And I just happened to have a picture before I sent them in, because I really, you know, the piece I really loved was this. It was a variegated baby yarn that I knitted a striped little scarf, and it was just this little tiny thing. And then I took green baby yarn, which coordinated, and crocheted a larger end to it, and it closed with a button. So I was really like that piece. This was a neck gaiter or cowl, kind of a very tight cowl that I donated that was knit out of light yarn. This was just basic, good old worsted, and yes, I have the label for this. I'll show you this later. It's from some 1970s yarn that I found at the Goodwill. and it made a very interesting scarf knit on large needles. And this is another piece. So this is all found yarn, rescued yarn that I worked with, and then I gave it to other people. However, one of my favorite piece that I gave away, I don't have a picture of because I literally finished it at a Civil War reenactment. So, and I gave it away there, but it looks like a sea slug, an orange sea slug. It was bright orange fluorescent yarn. And I'm working on it. And this little guy comes up, he's about 6 years old, and says, "That's a sea slug. I just learned about those." And they're like, "Yeah, it's a sea slug." So I finished it at the event and gave it to him, and he still has it in his room 5 years later. So I thought that was really cool. But so sometimes I just let the yarn tell me what it wants to be. It's kind of like when I write and my characters decide who they're going to be. The yarn goes the same way. So sometimes I go back to the dishcloth, knit bigger needles, just different colors. Sometimes I give it children. I make coasters to go with the dishcloth. I'm a dishcloth freak here, but that's what we do. This is a pattern actually that I'm going to be giving to my students. It's a Swiffer cover. This one is incomplete, but it's basically, you can use it to cover your Swiffer. You don't have to dispose things. It's good for the environment. You just throw it in the washer, and it will basically get straps and button onto your Swiffer. And you make it with, scrap buttons, scrap yarn. Actually, I had all the same kind of yarn, but they show it using different scraps, just fill in the pieces. That's a Mason-Dixon knitting pattern. And it's really great. So that's one of the few pieces I had because it's not finished. And one more piece that I still have. Whoa, wait a minute. What'd I do? Okay, let me zoom. Okay, it's talking. Oh, we don't want it to do that. All right, I'm having a technology moment. There it is.
There it is.
That's the last piece. That's actually a baby blanket that is actually worked just like the dishcloth, but we're up to about 190 stitches across there. And I was knitting one night at a party, very tired, and I messed it all up. And I've got to go back in and rip out 190 stitches across and try not to lose all my stitches and drop them back down all the way to the beginning. And I just haven't had the guts to do that. And now that kid is 8 years old, but someday that will become there. All right, I'm stopping the share because that's all my slides. I was going to show you the little thing. This is a Love Knits from 1970s. That was that lovely, I still have bits and pieces of the yellow yarn. That's been one of my sample yarns for this week. So the other thing that I find with knitting, though, why I keep going back to my dishcloth, is that it's a way to center myself. I know how to knit that dishcloth no matter what. And if I just need to de-stress, I start knitting. Just throw on the stitches and start working that, and just helps me find my center again, helps me find my path. And I'm trying to help my students figure that out too. By using my hands, it becomes a meditation of this step. These are the steps that make this, then these are the steps back to myself. Now my students, they've been really working at this. We've kind of done a freeform project because with quarantine, people had different size needles, different size yarn, different parts. So rather than try and do a consistent project through it, was like, okay, you're going to cast on some stitches. Now we're going to knit. If you want to try these stitches to add in, and it will be basically a sampler piece, and it will be a sampler scarf, or if it gets to be really just a short piece, we'll make it into a cowl and just seam up the back, and it will be there. I actually have two students who have knitted before that are in there. One lady knitted 30 years ago and wanted to refresh her skills. She is in there and she has completed a scarf. She finished a cowl today, and she is now working on a basket weave. I have a sample of basket weave here. This is basket weave. She's working on a basket weave pillow cover for her daughter. So she is just zooming through. But she was afraid that she didn't remember how to knit. And as I reminded her, her hands know how to knit. Her head may not remember how to knit, but her hands do this. It's muscle memory. And once you get started, it comes back to you. So she's doing that. Another person has finished a cowl and is working on her next project. And other people, I had one girl today, halfway through the week, she's there like, it was getting too big. I was picking up too many stitches. It wasn't working right. So I just ripped it all out and cast off halfway through class today. But she said, I'll just start knitting again. So they've got the confidence of this is their skill now. They own their skill and they can do what they want with it, which was my whole goal for this, is to just have them develop that skill in their hands, in their hearts, and in their heads, be able to bring that back in, and to realize that knitting can be not a stressful challenge all the time, but just something that they can retreat to and use it to rebuild themselves. So that's pretty much what we've been doing in the knitting class. It's been free form. I've been learning to knit leaning on my back so people can watch over my shoulder with my computer camera, and I'm laying in the chair with my hands in the air knitting. It's very unusual looking, but it does seem to work. So that's pretty much it. If anybody has any questions, that's it. I mean, and this isn't even my prime. I mean, I'm a photographer, I'm a writer. That's what I usually do my skills for, but knitting is kind of like my little secret hobby there.
Thank you, Nancy.
You're welcome, Linda.
And you remind me that each of you, talking about your individual media, have developed so much muscle memory in your hands, and your students do as you teach them. Joanne beads in her sleep. I know she does. You see how prolific she is. She can't stop herself, and it's always something new. She's like a research scientist that finds one solution, and that solution raises a question. What if? And all of a sudden she's off and running on another technique. I think Carly's the same way. She had a perfectly beautiful Dutch braid, and she says to herself, what if? And she fluffs it out, and it's a totally different look. So as a practitioner of fiber arts, I think we have that shelter and comfort in the muscle memory that it takes to accomplish what we do.
Absolutely.
But we also have that sense of adventure in that once you have those skills, you ask yourself, what if?
Mm-hmm.
And you try something else or a combination. Does anybody have a comment about that?
Well, I would like to say, I think that's how art is created, right? We kind of get tired of the norm, and you want to buck the system a little bit. Like, for example, I was tired of doing one single braid right down the back. I mean, that was just, it got old. What can I do to jazz it up a little bit? And I think that's how art is created. And I think that's the beautiful part about it, is once you feel confident, you branch off. And that, I mean, who knows what's going to happen, but that's a beautiful part.
Well, in my art form, I call this works in a series, because as I'm nearing the completion on one piece, I'm thinking, well, suppose I had changed this center portion a little bit. Maybe I'm moving the whole thing to this side, like braiding with what Carly does. Moving from the center braid opened up a whole new world for her. And the same thing is true if you move one piece out of its normal place, or add a technique, or change the length. It's something new. And even though we're challenged by newness, it's very exciting to try something new. Well, in our talk about fibers tonight, let me ask you, we've spoken a little bit about time. And it's a question that people who buy our work, or people who see us doing this work, they're like, well, how long did that take you? Carly's a magician. I mean, she can make those incredible braids at unbelievable speed. Joanne, how much time would you say goes into one of your modular necklaces?
I couldn't say, because I don't necessarily work on one thing at one time. And with the modules, you just make a whole bunch and then put it together. I mean, this has been
Awesome.
going on for a while, and it just ends up It's playing with color. And it's reusing a lot of the samples that I work on in classes. And then I go home with all these little pieces and stick them together. So this will end up being a long piece, and these resin beads are nice because they add a change in scale, but they're light.
Like Nancy, how long would it take you to do one of the washcloths?
Dishcloth is maybe three to 4 hours, depending on how much I'm paying attention to it. I sometimes can work faster, but I don't want to lose count. And part of it is, where did I throw? Here, what I do is, I finish them off, and the actual pattern starts with, it just has like a stump down here and a stump up here, and you just nut it off. I get out my crochet hook and I take a tail of yarn and crochet a hoop onto that end so it looks better. And then I take the little tail from what I started and just crochet into that loose end there so it makes it look more finished. So the finishing touches maybe take another 20 minutes just to add on to the very top and bottom, but it doesn't take long to do one of these. It's a meditation time. It's like I can put it down, pick it up, count the number of stitches that are on the needle, and then go from there. So it's really nice. It's droppable and pick upable yarn. It's not like I'm following a very intricate charted pattern where it's like, oh gosh, if I put it down, will I ever remember where I am? It's not that kind of thing.
Well, you and Carly, more than Joanne, who's runs her own business, your skills are truly a gift. You do things, someone likes them, you give it to them.
Yes.
Or you do things for separate staff, you don't donate. Carly's improving the feeling of self-worth and confidence of everybody that goes through those 6th grade camps. She works at Hashiwa, that beautiful place, and she brings beauty into the lives of those girls who come there and the athletes that she works with. She uses her skills as a gift. So the time that it takes is not important in calculating the worth of the piece.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm getting at with Joanne, we do these we used to do high-end craft shows. None of
Ones
them
that used to be there, yeah.
happening anymore. Sugarloaf went bankrupt, and every show that I know of I still haven't heard about the Maryland Renaissance Festival, but I can't imagine that they're going to have that, or the Maryland Wine Festival. They haven't announced that yet. I can't imagine that they will have that. But often an artist who works that has a business has to calculate the time that it takes with the cost of materials of construction and look at what the market will bear and calculate some sort of fair price. Joanne uses very masterful lamp glass beads in her work, gemstone beads, all kinds of things like that, that lend the beauty, the color, the texture to her creations. So of course, as she's pricing the work, she has an encyclopedic mind.
Absolutely.
As to keeping track of all the ingredients. I mean, you've seen some samples. Within one piece, there might be beads from 15 places. And she can tell you where they all come from. Nancy, I'm sure you've been showing us your store of yarn.
Oh no, you haven't even gotten close. There are bins in the basement right now that are packed full, and I'll open up like, oh, that's where that was. It's always so exciting to shop my stash. Yeah. And that's the yarn. You don't even want to see the fabric. So
well, one thing you could tell your students, the Potomac Fiber Arts Guild has a sale every year where we de-stash our studio. It's in Bethesda, and it's the first Saturday of November.
Okay, I have friends down in Montgomery County that have probably been there. The people that I work with at the Montgomery County Fair probably are.
Well, it's a church in Bethesda, and if you Google Potomac Fiber Arts Gallery, or you know,
okay,
you'll find what the exact address is. I don't know that off the top of my head.
Excellent.
My GPS gets me there.
Okay, Potomac Fiber Arts Gallery.
Yes.
I'm writing this down now on my,
And it's the first Saturday in November.
okay, my secretary has gotten it.
We de-stash our studios of, there's a lot of yarn, but also people will sell, works they've had a while. And there's a lot of there's people that hand dye yarn and will sell at a discount at that sale. So
Nice.
there's really nice stuff.
I know that we lost the sheep and, well, we didn't really lose the Sheep and Wool Festival. The Sheep and Wool Festival became an online venture this year. And
Well, it might have worked for the people selling supplies, but for people selling the finished goods,
absolutely.
people
Yeah.
have to. It. I don't think I got a single hit.
Oh, I'm sorry. I mean, I know that the people that were looking for yarn and looking for all the various pieces, they were like scavenging through the sites.
Right.
But I think they also managed to crash the site at one point, and then they had to come back in, and the joys of technology, as we call them.
Right.
It's a little scary. Some of these craft shows now are going virtual. And to say, okay, I'll do it. How do I get myself set up for it?
Well, that's another problem that we will have to tackle for next year, probably. Thank you so much for the fiber and wearable gallery talk. Tomorrow night, we have 2 artists. Sasha Lane is teaching with us for the first time, brave woman. She's been to Common Ground, so she knows what we're like. Phil Grout is such a popular instructor. We have to have him all 3 weeks, and his class was one of the first to fill every single week. He is a masterful photojournalist. He's got an incredible eye, and he's a marvelous teacher. So we're doing a duet tomorrow between Sasha and Phil. Please join us for that at 6:30. I understand the tape, the video of our first gallery talk got 100 views before Monday night was over. After people went to hear the keynote speaker, there was an hour before they went to the gazebo, and a lot of them took advantage of that to go to the YouTube site and see the very first gallery talk. You're welcome to come to every gallery talk. We're running Monday through Thursday. For your information, the student art show will be assembled at the conclusion of Common Ground. Maria, the hardest working woman at Common Ground, is going to put together the student art show all 3 weeks, and you will be able to enjoy that the rest of the summer. It will be archived at the conclusion of this summer. So thank you for joining us this evening. Please join us tomorrow. Then you get 3 nights off. So be good, be crafty, be creative, and join us again tomorrow and then on Monday for week 2 at the digital version of Common Ground on the Hill. Good night, everybody.